Bitch has got a body. I'll tell you that.
Macmillan Audio presents Neferet's Curse by PC Cast and Kristen Cast. Read for you by Caitlin Davies.
Let me just pour the oil first. Pour a little bit more oil.
January 15, 1893. Emily Wheeler's Journal. Entry. The first. This is not a diary. I loathe the very thought of compiling my thoughts and actions in a locked book, secreted away as if they were precious jewels. I know my thoughts are not precious jewels. I have begun to suspect my thoughts are quite mad. That is why I feel compelled to record them. It could be that in the rereading sometime in the future, I will discover why these horrible things have befallen me. Or I will discover that I have, indeed, lost my mind. If that be the case, then this will serve as a record of the onset of my paranoia and madness, so as to lay the foundation to discover a cure. Do I want to be cured? Perhaps that is a question that would be best set aside for now. First, let me begin when everything changed. It was not on this, the first date of my journal. It was 2½ months ago, on the first day of November, in the year 1892. That was the morning my mother died. Even here in the silent pages of this journal, I hesitate to recall that terrible morning. My mother died in a tide of blood, which surged from within her following the birth of the small, lifeless body of my brother, Barrett, named after father. It seemed to me then, as it does today, that mother simply gave up when she saw that Barrett would not draw breath. It was as if even the life force that sustained her could not bear the loss of her precious, only son. Or was the full truth that she could not bear to face father after the loss of his precious only son? That question would not have entered my mind before that morning. Until the morning my mother died, the questions that most often entered my mind were focused on how I might persuade mother to allow me to purchase another one of the new cycling costumes that were all the rage, or how I could make my hair look exactly like a Gibson girl. If I had thought of father before the morning mother died, it was as most of my girlfriends thought of their fathers, as a distant and somewhat intimidating patriarch. In my particular case, father only praised me through mother's comments. Actually, before mother's death, he seemed to rarely notice me at all. Father was not in the room when mother died. The doctor had proclaimed the birthing process too vulgar for a man to witness, especially not a man of the import of Barrett H. Wheeler, president of the First National Bank of Chicago. And me, Barrett and Alice Wheeler's daughter? The doctor did not mention the vulgarity of childbirth to me. Actually, the doctor did not even notice me until after mother was dead, and father had brought me to his attention. Emily, you will not leave me. You will wait with me until the doctor arrives, and then remain there in the window seat. You should know what it is to be a wife and mother. You should not go blindly into it, as did I. Mother had commanded me in that soft voice of hers, which made everyone who did not truly know her believe she was soft-headed and no more than a beautiful, compliant bauble on father's arm. Yes, mother, I had said with a nod, and done as she had ordered. I remember sitting, still as a shadow, in the unlit window seat across from the bed in Mother's opulent bedchamber. I saw everything. It did not take her long to die. There was so much blood. Barrett had been born in blood, a small, still, gore-covered creature. He had looked like a grotesque, broken doll. After the spasm that had expelled him from between Mother's legs, the blood did not stop. It kept surging and surging, while my mother wept tears as silent as her son. I knew she wept because she had turned her head away from the sight of the doctor, wrapping the dead baby in linens. Mother's gaze met mine then. I could not remain in the window seat. I rushed to the side of her bed and, while the doctor and his nurse futilely attempted to staunch the scarlet river that gushed from her, I gripped her hand and brushed the damp hair back from her forehead. Through my tears and my fear, I tried to murmur reassurance to her and tell her that everything would be well once she rested. Mother had squeezed my hand and whispered, I'm glad you are here with me at the end. No, you'll get better, Mother, I protested. Shh, she'd soothed. Just hold my hand. Her voice had faded away then, but Mother's emerald eyes, which everyone said were so like mine, did not look away from me all the while her flushed face went shockingly white, and her breath softened, caught, and then on a sigh, ceased altogether. I'd kissed her hand then, and staggered back to my window seat, where I'd wept, unnoticed as the nurse performed the daunting job of disposing of the soaked linens and making Mother presentable for Father's viewing. But Father hadn't waited until Mother had been prepared for him. He'd pushed into the room, ignoring the protestations of the doctor. "It is a son, you say?" Father had not so much as glanced at the bed. Instead, he had hurried to the bassinet, wherein lay the shrouded body of Barrett. "It was indeed a boy, child," the doctor said somberly. "Born too soon, as I told you, sir. There was nothing to be done. His lungs were too weak. He never drew breath. He did not utter one cry. Dead. Silent." Father had wiped a hand wearily across his face. "Do you know when Emily was born? She cried so lustily I heard her in the drawing room downstairs and believed her to be a son. Well, Mr. Wheeler, I know it is of little consolation after losing a son and a wife, but you do have a daughter, and through her the promise of heirs." "She promised me heirs!" Father shouted, finally turning to look at Mother. I must have made some small, wounded sound because Father's eyes instantly flicked to my window seat. They narrowed, and for a moment, it didn't seem he recognized me. And then he shook himself, as if trying to shiver something uncomfortable from his skin. "Emily, why are you here?" Father's voice had sounded so angry that it seemed the question he'd meant to ask was much more than why I was in that room at that particular time. Mother bade me stay," I had stuttered. "Your mother is dead," he'd said, anger flattened to hard-edged truth. "And this is no place for a young lady." The doctor's face had been flushed when he faced my father. "Beg pardon, Mr. Wheeler. I was too occupied with the birth to notice the girl there." "The fault was not yours, Dr. Fisher. My wife often did and said things that perplexed me. This is simply the last of them." Father made a dismissive gesture that took in the doctor, the maids, and me. "Now, leave me with Mrs. Wheeler, all of you." I wanted to run from the room, to escape as quickly as possible, but my feet had gone numb and cold from sitting unmoving for so long, and as I passed Father, I'd stumbled. His hand caught me under the elbow. I looked up, startled. His expression had suddenly appeared to soften as he gazed down at me.
You have your mother's eyes.
Yes, breathless and light-headed. That was all I could say.
That is as it should be. You are now the lady of Wheeler House.
Then Father released me and walked slowly, heavily, to the bloody bed. As I closed the door behind me, I heard him begin to weep. Thereby also began my strange and lonely time of mourning. I moved numbly through the funeral and collapsed afterward. It was as if sleep had taken me over. I could not break free of it. For 2 full months I hardly left my bed. I did not care that I grew thin and pale. I did not care that the social condolence calls of my mother's friends and their daughters were left unanswered. I did not notice that Christmas and a New Year came and went. Mary, my mother's lady's maid, whom I had inherited, begged, cajoled, and scolded. I cared not at all. It was the 5th day of January when Father broke me free of sleep's hold. My room had grown cold, so cold that my shivering had awakened me. The fire in my hearth had died and not been relit, so I pulled the sash attached to Mary's summoning bell, which tinkled all the way down in the servants' quarters in the bowels of the house. But she had not answered my call. I remember putting on my dressing gown and thinking, briefly, how large it seemed, and how very much it engulfed me. Making my way slowly from my 3rd-floor bedchamber down the wide, wooden stairway, shivering, I searched for Mary. Father had emerged from his study as I came to the bottom of the stairs. When he first saw me, his eyes were blank. Then his expression registered surprise. Surprise followed by something I was almost certain was disgust.
Emily, you look wretched, thin and pale. Are you ill?
Before I could answer, Mary was there, hurrying across the foyer toward us. I told you, Mr. Wheeler, she's not been eating. I said she was doing nothing but sleeping. Wasting away she is. Mary had spoken briskly, her soft Irish accent more pronounced than usual.
Well, this behavior must end at once, Father had said sternly. Emily, you will leave your bed. You will eat. You will take daily walks in the gardens. I simply will not have you looking emaciated. You are, after all, the lady of Wheeler House, and my lady cannot look as if she were a starving gutter waif.
His eyes had been hard. His anger had been intimidating, especially as I realized Mother wouldn't appear from her parlor, buzzing with distracting energy and shooing me away while pacifying Father with a smile and a touch. I took an automatic step away from him, which only made his expression darker.
You have your mother's look, but not her spunk. As irritating as it had been at times, I admired her spunk. I miss it.
I miss Mother too, I heard myself blurt. Of course you do, Dove, Mary had soothed. It's only been little over 2 months.
And we have something in common after all.
Father had ignored Mary completely, and spoken as if she hadn't been there, nervously touching my hair, smoothing my dressing gown.
The loss of Alice Wheeler has created our commonality.
He turned his head then, studying me.
You do have her look.
Father stroked his dark beard, and his gaze lost its hard, intimidating cast.
We shall have to make the best of her absence, you know.
Yes, Father. I'd felt relieved at the gentling of his voice.
Good. Then I expect you to join me for dinner each evening, as you and your mother used to. No more of this hiding in your room, starving your looks away.
I had smiled then. Actually smiled. I would like that, I'd said. He'd grunted, slapped the newspaper he'd been holding across his arm, and nodded.
At dinner, then,
he'd said, and he walked past me, disappearing into the west wing of the house. I may be even a little hungry tonight, I'd said to Mary as she clucked at me and helped me up the stairway. "'Tis good to see he's taken an interest in ye, it is," Mary had whispered happily. I'd hardly paid any attention to her. My only thought was that for the first time in a month, I had something more than sleep and sadness to look forward to. Father and I shared a commonality. I dressed carefully for dinner that evening, understanding for the first time how very thin I had become when my black morning dress had to be pinned so that it did not hang unattractively loose. Mary combed my hair, twining it in a thick chignon that I had thought made my newly thin face look much older than my 15 years. I will never forget the start it gave me when I entered our dining room and saw the two place settings, Father's, where he had always been at the head of the table, and mine, now placed at Mother's spot to Father's right hand. He'd stood and held Mother's chair for me. I was sure as I sat that I could still smell her perfume, rosewater, with just a hint of the lemon rinse she used on her hair to bring out the richness of her auburn highlights. George, a Negro man, who served our dinner, began ladling from the soup tureen. I'd worried that the silence would be terrible, but as Father began to eat, so too began his familiar words.
The Columbian Exposition Committee has joined collectively behind Burnham. We are supporting him completely. I wondered at first that the man might be a touch mad, that he was attempting something unattainable. But his vision of Chicago's World's Columbian Exposition outshining Paris's splendor seems to be within reach. Or at least his design appears to be sound. Extravagant, but sound.
He paused to take a healthy mouthful of the steak and potatoes that had replaced his empty soup bowl, and in that pause, I could hear my mother's voice. "Is not extravagance what everyone is calling for?" And didn't realize until Father looked up at me that it had been I who had spoken and not, after all, the ghost of Mother. I froze under his sharp, dark-eyed scrutiny, wishing I'd kept silent and daydreamed the meal away, as I had so many times in the past.
And how do you know what everyone is calling for?
His keen, dark eyes were sharp on me, but his lips lifted slightly at the corners, just as he used to almost smile at Mother. I remember feeling a rush of relief and smiling heartily in return. His question was one I'd heard him ask Mother more times than I could begin to count. I let her words reply for me. "I know you believe all women do is talk, but they listen too." I spoke more quickly and more softly than Mother, but Father's eyes had crinkled in the corners as he showed his approval and amusement.
"Indeed,"
he'd said with a chuckle, cutting a large piece of bloody red meat and eating it as if he were ravenous, while he gulped down glasses of wine as red and dark as the liquid that ran from his meat.
"But I must keep close tabs on Burnham and his gaggle of architects. Close tabs indeed. They are grotesquely over budget, and those workmen, always a problem. Always a problem."
Father spoke as he chewed, dribbling bits of food and wine into his beard, a habit I knew Mother had loathed and often rebuked him for. I did not rebuke him, nor did I loathe his well-ingrained habit. I simply forced myself to eat and to make the proper noises of appreciation as he spoke on and on about the importance of fiscal responsibility and the worry that the frail health of one of the lead architects was causing the board in general. After all, Mr. Root had already succumbed to pneumonia. Some said he'd been the driving force behind the entire project, and not Burnham at all. The dinner sped quickly by, until Father had finally eaten and spoken his fill. Then he had stood, and as I had heard him wish uncountable times to my mother, he'd said,
"I shall retire to my library for a cigar and a whiskey. Have a pleasant evening, my dear, and I shall see you again soon."
I remember vividly feeling a great warmth for him as I thought, he is treating me as if I were a woman grown, a true lady of the house.
"Emily,"
he'd continued, even though he'd been rather wobbly and obviously well into his cups.
"let us decide that as we have just begun a new year, it will mark a new beginning for the both of us. Shall we try to move forward together, my dear?"
Tears had come to my eyes, and I'd smiled tremulously up at him. "Yes, Father, I would like that very much." Then, quite unexpectedly, he had lifted my thin hand in his large one, bent over it, and kissed it, just exactly as he used to kiss Mother's hand in parting. Even though his lips and beard were moist from the wine and the food, I was still smiling and feeling ever so much like a lady when, holding my hand in his, he met my gaze. That was the first time I saw it, what I have come to think of as the burning look. It was as if his eyes stared so violently into mine that I feared they would cause me to combust.
"Your eyes or your mother's?"
he said, his words slurred, and I smelled the sharp reek of his breath, heavily tainted by wine. I found I could not speak. I only shivered and nodded. Father dropped my hand then, and walked unsteadily from the room. Before George began to clear the table, I took my linen napkin and rubbed it across the back of my hand, wiping away the wetness left there, and wondering why I felt such an uneasy sensation deep in my stomach. Madeline Elcott and her daughter Camille were the first of the social calls I received 2 days later. Mr. Elcott was on the board of Father's bank, and Mrs. Elcott had been a great friend of Mother's, though I'd never truly understood why. Mother had been beautiful and charming, and a renowned hostess. In comparison, Mrs. Elcott had seemed waspish, gossipy, and miserly. When she and Mother sat together at dinner parties, I used to think Mrs. Elcott looked like a clucking chicken next to a dove. But she had the ability to make Mother laugh, and Mother's laughter had been so magical. It had made the reason for it unimportant. I'd once overheard Father telling Mother that she would simply have to do more entertaining because dinner parties at the Elcott mansion were short on spirits and courses, and long on talk. Had anyone ever asked for my opinion, which of course they did not, I would have agreed wholeheartedly with Father. The Elcott mansion was less than a mile from our home and looked stately and proper from the outside, but the inside was Spartan and, actually, rather gloomy. Little wonder Camille so loved visiting me. Camille was my best friend. She and I were close in age, she being only 6 months the younger. Camille talked a lot, but not in the cruel, gossipy way of her mother. Because of the closeness of our parents, Camille and I had grown up together, which had made us more like sisters than best friends. "Oh, my poor, sad Emily! How thin and wan you look," Camille had said as she rushed into Mother's parlor and embraced me. "Well, of course she looks thin and wan." Mrs. Elcott had moved her daughter aside and stiffly taken my hands in hers before she'd even shed her white leather gloves. Remembering her touch, I realized now that she'd felt cold and quite reptilian. "Emily has lost her mother, Camille. Think of how wretched your life would be had you lost me. I would expect you to look just as terrible as poor Emily. I'm sure dear Alice is looking down on her daughter in understanding and appreciation." not expecting her to speak so freely of Mother's death. I felt a little shock at Mrs. Elcott's words. I tried to catch Camille's gaze as we moved apart, settling ourselves on the divan and matching chairs. I'd wanted to share with her our old look, one that said we agreed how sometimes our mothers could say terribly embarrassing things. But Camille seemed to be looking everywhere but at me. "Yes, Mother, of course. I apologize," was all she muttered contritely. Trying to feel my way through this new social world that suddenly was very foreign, I breathed a long breath of relief when the housemaid bustled in with tea and cakes. I poured. Mrs. Elcott and Camille studied me. "You really are quite thin," Camille said finally. "I will be better soon," I'd said, sending her a reassuring smile. At first, I found it difficult to do anything except sleep, but Father has insisted that I get well. He reminded me that I am now the Lady of Wheeler House. Camille's gaze had flicked quickly to her mother's. I could not read the hard look in Mrs. Elcott's eyes, but it was enough to silence her daughter. "That is quite brave of you, Emily," Mrs. Elcott spoke into the silence. "I am sure you are a great comfort to your father." "We tried to see you for 2 whole months, but you wouldn't receive us, not even during the holidays. It was like you disappeared," Camille blurted as I poured her tea. "I thought you died too." "I'm sorry." At first her words had made me contrite. "I didn't mean to upset you." "Of course you didn't," Mrs. Elcott had said, frowning at her daughter. "Camille, Emily wasn't disappearing. She was mourning." "I still am," I'd said softly. Camille heard me and nodded, wiping her eyes, but her mother had been too busy helping herself to the iced cakes to pay either of us much attention.
Did they say anything about
There was a silence that seemed very long while we sipped our tea and I pushed the small white cake around my plate. And then, in a high, excited voice, Mrs. Elcott asked, "Emily, were you really there? In the room with her when Alice died?" I looked to Camille, wishing for an instant that she could silence her mother. But of course that had been a foolish, futile wish. My friend's face had mirrored my own discomfort, though she did not appear shocked at her mother's disregard for propriety and privacy. I realized then that Camille had known her mother was going to question me thus. I drew a deep, fortifying breath and answered truthfully, though hesitantly. "Yes, I was there." "It must have been quite ghastly," Camille said quickly. "Yes," I said. I'd placed my teacup carefully in its saucer before either of them could see that my hand trembled. "I expect there had been a lot of blood," Mrs. Elcott said, nodding slowly as if in pre-agreement with my response. There was. I'd clasped my hands tightly together in my lap. "When we heard you were in the room when she died, we were all so very sorry for you," Camille had said softly, hesitantly. Shocked silent, I could almost hear Mother's voice saying sharply, "Servants and their gossip." I was mortified that Mother's death had been the topic of gossip, but I'd also longed to talk to Camille, to tell her how frightened I'd been. But before I could collect myself enough to speak, her mother's sharp voice had intruded. "Indeed, it was all anyone could talk about for weeks and weeks. Your poor mother would have been appalled. Bad enough that you missed the Christmas ball, but for the topic of conversation during the evening to have been your witnessing her gruesome death." Mrs. Elcott shuddered. "Alice would have thought it as dreadful as it was." My cheeks had flamed hot. I had utterly forgotten about the Christmas ball and my 16th birthday. Both had taken place in December, when sleep had been cloaking me from life. Everyone was talking about me at the ball? I'd wanted to run back to my room and never emerge. Camille's words came fast, and she had made a vague movement, as if she understood how difficult the conversation had become for me, and was trying to brush away the subject. Nancy, Evelyn, and Elizabeth were worried about you. We were all worried about you. We still are.
You left out one person who seemed especially concerned. Arthur Simpson. Remember how you said he could talk of nothing except how horrible it all must have been for Emily, even while he was waltzing with you?
Mrs. Alcott hadn't sounded worried at all. She'd sounded angry. I'd blinked and felt as if I was swimming up through deep, murky waters. Arthur Simpson? He was talking about me?
Yes. Wow, he danced with Camille.
Mrs. Alcott's tone had been hard with annoyance, and I'd suddenly understood why. Arthur Simpson was the eldest son of a wealthy railroad family that had recently relocated from New York City to Chicago because of close business ties with Mr. Pullman. Besides being rich, suitably bred, and eligible, he was also extremely handsome. Camille and I had whispered about him as his family moved into their South Prairie Avenue mansion, and we watched him riding his bicycle up and down the street. Arthur had been the single driving force behind our desire to obtain our own bicycles and to join the Hermes Bicycle Club. He had also been one of the key reasons both of our mothers had agreed to pressure our fathers into allowing us to do so, even though Camille had told me she'd heard her father informing her mother that bicycle bloomers could lead a young woman into a life of pernicious lasciviousness. I remembered it clearly, because Camille had made me giggle as she'd done an excellent impression of her father. As I'd laughed, she'd also said she'd be willing to enter a life of pernicious lasciviousness if it meant entering it with Arthur Simpson. I hadn't said anything then. It hadn't seemed necessary. Arthur had, quite often, looked our way, but the both of us knew it was my eyes he met when he tipped his hat, and my name he called a "Bright good morning, Miss Emily," too. I shook my head, feeling woozy and slow. I turned to Camille.
Okay, baby? Yeah.
Arthur Simpson? He danced with you?
Most of the evening, Mrs. Alcott had spoken for her daughter, nodding her head so quickly the feathers on her hat fluttered with disturbing violence, making her look even more hen-like. In truth, Camille and I believe Arthur Simpson will approach Mr. Alcott soon and ask permission to formally court her.
My stomach had felt terrible and hollow. How could he court Camille? Little over 2 months ago, he hadn't so much as spoken her name to wish her a good morning. Could such a short amount of time change him so drastically? Yes, I decided silently and quickly. Yes, a short amount of time could change anyone drastically. It had certainly changed me. I'd opened my mouth to speak, though I was still not sure what it was I was going to say, and Father had burst into the room, looking frazzled and wearing no jacket.
"Ah, Emily, here you are."
He nodded absently to Mrs. Alcott and Camille, saying,
"Good afternoon, ladies."
Then he turned his full attention to me.
"Emily, which waistcoat should I wear this evening? The black or the burgundy? The board is meeting again with those infernal architects, and I need to use a firm hand. The right tone must be set. Their budget is out of control and time is short. The fair must open May the 1st. They are simply not prepared. They climb too steep. Too steep."
I blinked, trying to focus on the bizarre scene. Arthur Simpson's name, linked with Camille's, had still been almost tangible in the air around us while Father stood there, his dress shirt untucked and only partially buttoned, a waistcoat in each hand, waving them about as if they were flags unfurled. Mrs. Alcott and Camille were staring at him as if he had lost his mind. I was suddenly angry, and I'd automatically come to Father's defense. Mother always said the black is more formal, but the burgundy is richer. Wear the burgundy, Father. The architects should see you as rich enough to control the money and, therefore, their futures. I tried my best to pitch my voice softly, to mimic my mother's soothing tone. Father had nodded. Yes, yes. It should be as your mother said. The richer is the better. Yes. Well done. He bowed briskly to the other two women, wishing them a good day, and then he hurried out. Before the door closed, I could see his valet, Carson, joining him in the hallway and taking the discarded black waistcoat that was tossed his way. When I turned back to the Elcott women, I lifted my chin. As you can see, Father has been depending upon me. Mrs. Elcott had lifted a brow and sniffed. I do see. Your father is a fortunate man, and the man to whom he eventually marries you will be fortunate as well, to have such a well-trained wife. Her gaze went to her daughter, and then she smiled silkily as she'd continued. Though I imagine your father won't want to part with you for several years, so marriage is out of the question for your foreseeable future. Marriage? A jolt had gone through me at the word. Camille and I had talked about it, of course, but we had mostly whispered about the courting, the betrothal, the sumptuous wedding, and not the actual marriage itself. Mother's voice had suddenly echoed from my memory. Emily, you will not leave me. You should know what it is to be a wife and mother. You should not go blindly into it as did I. I'd felt a shudder of panic and added, Oh, I couldn't possibly think about marriage now. Of course you can't think about marriage right now. Neither of us should. Not really. We're 16. That's entirely too young. Isn't that what you've always said, Mother? Camille had sounded strained, almost frightened. Thinking about a thing and preparing for a thing are not one and the same, Camille. Opportunity should not be overlooked. And that is what I have always said. Mrs. Elcott had peered down her long nose at me while she spoke with disdain. Well, I think it is a good thing that I am devoted to my father, I'd responded, feeling horribly uncomfortable and unsure of what else to say. Oh, we are all in agreement about that, Mrs. Elcott had said. They hadn't stayed long after Father's appearance. Mrs. Elcott had rushed Camille off, not giving us even one small chance to speak to each other alone. It was as if she'd gotten what she'd come for and left satisfied. And me? What had I gotten? I'd hoped for validation. Even though the affection of the handsome young Arthur Simpton had turned from me to my friend, I'd believed it was my duty as a daughter to care for my father. I'd felt that Camille and her mother would see that I was doing my best to carry on after Mother. That in a little over 2 months, I'd grown from girl to woman. I'd thought that somehow I could make the loss of Mother bearable. But in the long, silent hours after their visit, my mind had begun to replay the events and to view their facets differently. And on retrospection, I feel my second view to be more valid than my first. Mrs. Elcott had wanted substantiation of the gossip. She'd gotten her wish. She had also wanted to make it very clear that Arthur Simpton would not now be a part of my future, and that no man, other than Father, would be a part of my foreseeable future. She had accomplished both tasks. I'd sat up that night and waited for Father's return. Even now, as I record what happened next, I cannot fault myself for my actions. As the lady of Wheeler Mansion, it was my duty to see Father cared for, to be there with a tea or possibly a brandy for him, as I'd imagined Mother had often done upon his late return from work dinners. I had expected Father to be tired. I had expected him to be himself, aloof, gruff, and overbearing, yet polite and appreciative of my fidelity. I had not expected him to be drunk. I'd seen Father filled with wine. I had glimpsed him red-nosed and effusive in his praise of Mother's beauty as they went out in the evenings, dressed formally and trailing the scent of lavender, lemon, and cabernet. I cannot remember ever seeing them upon their return. Had I not been asleep in my bed, I would have been brushing my hair or embroidering the fine details of violets at the bodice of my newest day dress. I realize now that Father and Mother had been to me like distant moons circling the self-absorption of my youth. That night, Father evolved from moon to burning sun. He lurched inside the foyer, calling loudly for his valet, Carson. I'd been in Mother's parlor, trying to keep my heavy eyes open by rereading Emily Bronte's Gothic novel, Wuthering Heights. At the sound of his voice, I put the book aside and hurried to him. His scent came to me before I saw him. I remember that I pressed a hand against my nose, flustered at the rankness of brandy, sweat, and cigars. As I write this, I'm afraid that those three odors will for me forever be the scent of man and the scent of nightmares. I'd rushed to his side, pursing my lips at the thick reek of his breath, thinking that he must not be well. Father, are you ill? Shall I call the physician?
Physician? No. Right as rain. I'm right as rain. Just need some help getting to Alice's room. Not as young as I used to be, not at all. But I can still do my duty. I'll get her with the sun yet.
Father had swayed as he talked, and he put a heavy hand on my shoulder to steady himself. I staggered under his weight, guiding him to the wide stairway, so worried that he was ill that I hardly comprehended what he was saying. I'm here. I'll help you, was what I had whispered over and over to him. He leaned even more heavily on me as we climbed clumsily up to the second floor and finally stopped outside his bedchamber. He'd shaken his head back and forth, mumbling,
"This isn't her room."
"It is your bedchamber," I'd said, wishing his valet or anyone would appear. He'd squinted at me, as if he were having trouble focusing. Then his slack, drunken expression had changed.
Shit.
Alice?
The scroll line that
So you are willing to break your frigid rules and join my bed tonight?
His hand had been hot and damp on the shoulder of my fine linen nightgown. "Father, it's me, Emily."
Father?
He'd blinked and brought his face down closer to mine. His breath had almost made me retch.
Emily. Indeed, it is you. Yes, you. I know you now. You cannot be Alice. She is dead.
His face still so very close to mine, he added,
You're too thin. But you do have her eyes.
He'd reached out then and lifted a strand of the thick auburn hair that had escaped my nightcap.
And her hair. You have her hair.
He'd rubbed my hair between his fingers and slurred,
You must eat more. Shouldn't be so thin.
Then, bellowing for Carson to attend him, Father let loose my hair, shoved me aside, and staggered into his room. I should have retreated to my own bed then, but a terrible unease had come over me, and I ran, allowing my feet to carry me where they willed. When I finally halted, gasping to catch my breath, I found my blind flight had taken me into the gardens that stretched for more than 5 acres in the rear of our house. There I collapsed on a stone bench that sat concealed under the curtain of a massive willow tree, and put my face in my hands and wept. Then something magical happened. The warm night breeze lifted the willow branches, and the clouds blew away, exposing the moon. Though only a slim crescent, it was almost silver in its brilliance, and it seemed to beam metallic light into the garden, setting aglow the huge white marble fountain that was its central feature. Within the fountain, spewing water from his open mouth, was the Greek god Zeus, in the form of the bull that had tricked and then abducted the maiden Europa. The fountain had been a wedding gift from father to mother, and had been at the heart of Mother's extensive garden since my earliest memories. Perhaps it was because the fountain was Mother's, or perhaps it was from envy for the musicality of the bubbling water, but my tears stopped as I studied it. Eventually, my heartbeat slowed and my breathing became normal, and, even when the moon became cloaked by clouds once again, I remained beneath the tree, listening to the water and allowing it, as well as the concealing willow shadows, to soothe me until I knew I could sleep. Then I slowly made my way up to my third-floor bedchamber. That night, I dreamed I was Europa, and the white bull was carrying me away to a beautiful meadow where no one ever died, and where I was eternally young and carefree.
I want to say your mind, but I may be different. I may be wrong.
April 15th, 1893. Emily Wheeler's journal.
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
I should have written in my journal before now, but the months since my last entry have been so confusing, so difficult, that I have not been myself.
That don't mean nothing.
Childishly, I thought that by not writing, not recording the events that have unfolded, I could make it seem as if they had not happened, would not continue to happen. I was so very wrong. Everything has changed, and I must use this journal as evidence. Even if I am losing my mind, it will show an unraveling of madness and, as I originally hoped, provide a path for my treatment. And if, as I am coming to suspect, I am not mad, a record of these events should be made and might somehow aid me if I might choose a new future. Let me begin anew. After that cold night in January, when Father returned home drunk, I have never waited up for him again. I tried not to think much on it, tried not to remember his breath, the hot, heavy feel of his hand, and the things he'd said. Instead, when he departed for late dinner meetings, I wished him a pleasant good evening and said I would be sure Carson attended to him when he returned. At first, that stopped his burning looks. I was so busy with the running of Wheeler House that except for our dinners together, I saw Father very little. But over the past months, the dinners had changed. Rather, the dinners hadn't changed. The amount of wine consumed by Father is what changed. The more Father drank, the more often his eyes burned into me as he bid me good night. I began to carefully water his wine. He has not yet noticed. And then I threw all of my attention into taking complete responsibility for the running of Wheeler House. Yes, of course, Mary and Carson helped me, advised me. The cook made grocer lists, but I approved the menus. As Mary had once commented, it was as if my mother's spirit had taken me over, and I was a girl no more. I tried to tell myself that was a good thing, a lovely compliment. The truth was then, as it is today, I think I did my duty and continue to do my duty, but I am not sure that it is a good thing at all. It is not simply the work of being Lady of Wheeler House that has so changed me. It is how people began to change in their treatment of me. Yes, at first I had been overwhelmed by the extent of Mother's duties. I'd had no idea that she not only ran the household, instructed the servants, saw to every detail of Father's routine, supervised me, and volunteered twice a week at the General Federation of Women's Club, helping to feed and care for the homeless women and children of Chicago. Mother had been dead 5 months, and during that time, I had completely dedicated myself to being lady of Wheeler House. Thus, when Evelyn Field and Camille called on me one mid-morning early last month, asking if I would like to join them in riding our bicycles to the shore and picnicking, I'd been justifiably overwhelmed with the joy the freedom of the moment provided, especially as I had thought that Father had already left for the bank. "Oh, yes," I'd said happily, putting down my fountain pen and pushing aside the grocery list I'd been going over. I remember how happy Evelyn and Camille had been when I'd said yes. The 3 of us had laughed spontaneously. "Emily, I am so glad you will come with us." Camille had hugged me. "And you are looking so well, not pale and thin at all." "No, not pale at all," Evelyn agreed. "You're as beautiful as ever." "Thank you, Evelyn. I have missed everyone so much." I'd hesitated, feeling the need to share a confidence with someone who wasn't a servant, or my father. It has been difficult since Mother has been gone. Really difficult. Camille had chewed her lip. Evelyn had looked as if she were on the verge of tears. I quickly wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand and found my smile again. "But now that the both of you are here, I'm feeling much lighter than I have for weeks and weeks." "That's what we intended. Mother tried to tell me you were too busy to be bothered with bicycle riding, but I swore not to listen to her and called on you anyway," Camille had said. "Your mother is always too serious," Evelyn said, rolling her eyes skyward. "We all know that." "I don't believe she was ever young," Camille had said, making us giggle. I was still giggling as I hurried from the parlor, determined to rush up the stairs and change as quickly as possible into my riding bloomers, when I'd run straight into Father. The breath had been knocked out of me with an oof, and my eyes had teared.
"Emily, why ever would you be bolting from the parlor in such an uncivilized manner?"
Father had seemed a storm cloud in the making. Excuse me, Father," I'd stuttered. "Camille Alcott and Evelyn Field have called on me and asked that I bike to the lake with them for luncheon. I was hurrying to change my clothes." "Bicycling is excellent for the heart. It creates a strong constitution, though I do not approve of young people biking together with no adult supervision." I hadn't noticed the tall woman standing across the foyer from Father until she'd spoken. She'd taken me by surprise, and I'd stood there speechless, staring at her. In her deep blue dress and her peacock-plumed hat, she'd made quite an imposing figure, though one I had not recognized, and I'd wanted to say that I did not approve of old women wearing wildly plumed hats. But of course I'd held my tongue.
"Emily, do you not remember Mrs. Armour? She is chairwoman of the General Federation of Women's Club."
Father had prompted me. "Oh, yes. Mrs. Armour, I apologize for not recognizing you." I had recognized her name now that Father had spoken it, but I could not remember the woman herself. And I also apologize for rushing out," I'd continued hastily. "I do not mean to be impolite." I turned and made a gesture that took in Evelyn and Camille, where they sat in the parlor, watching with obvious curiosity. "But, as you can see, my friends are waiting for me. Father, I will ring for Mary to bring tea if you are entertaining Mrs. Armour in your study."
"You mistake me, Miss Wheeler. It is you, and not your father, with whom I wish to visit.
I'd been confused, and I believe I gaped rather stupidly at the old woman. Father had not been likewise confused.
Emily, Mrs. Armour has called on you to speak about your inherited place at the GFWC. It was a passion of your mother's. I expect it to be a passion of yours as well.
My confusion cleared as I realized why the name Armour had been familiar. Philip Armour was one of the wealthiest men in Chicago, and he kept much of his money in Father's bank. I turned to Mrs. Armour and made myself smile, pitching my voice to be soft and soothing, just as Mother used to sound. I would be honored to inherit Mother's place at the GFWC. Perhaps we can set a date for me to come to Market Hall and meet with you about... Suddenly, Father's big hand engulfed my elbow, squeezing while he commanded,
You will meet with Mrs. Armour now, Emily.
In comparison to my gentleness, Father was like a battlefield. I heard Evelyn and Camille both gasp at his forcefulness. Then Camille was there at my side, saying, We can easily call again, Emily. Please, your mother's work is so much more important than our silly bicycle outing. Yes, truly, Evelyn had added, as my friends moved hastily to the door. We'll call again. The sound of the door closing behind them had seemed to me like the ceiling of a tomb.
Ah, well, that is better. Enough of that foolishness, Father said as he loosed my elbow.
Mrs. Armour, please join me in the parlor, and I will ring Mary for tea, I'd said.
Good. Go on about your business, Emily. I will see you at dinner. Good girl. Good girl, Father had said gruffly.
He bowed to Mrs. Armour, and then left us alone together in the foyer.
I can tell you are a young woman of excellent character,
Mrs. Armour said, as I woodenly led her into Mother's parlor.
I am sure we will get on well together, just as your mother and I did.
I nodded and agreed, and let the old woman talk on and on about the importance of women of means being united in their dedication to improving the community through volunteer service. In the weeks that have followed, I have come to realize how ironic it was that Mrs. Armour, who lectured unendingly about the importance of the unity of women, has become one of the main instruments in isolating me from other women my age. You see, Evelyn and Camille have not called again to ask that I bike with them. Evelyn has not called on me at all since that morning. Camille was different. It would take more to lose her as a friend. Much more.
You know, natural gas in and of itself doesn't smell anything. They add something to the gas to let you know you got a gas leak. But every other natural gas I smell, it smells like red onions. It never smelled like tar.
March passed into April. The winter chill was tempered by a spring that came with light, reviving showers. My life has aligned itself into a numbing rhythm. I run the household. I volunteer at the wretched market hall, feeding the poor while I nod and agree with the old women who surround me when they drone on and on about how, because the spotlight of the world would shortly be on us and the World's Fair, we must use our every resource to change and shape Chicago from a barbaric gathering into a modern city. I have dinner with Father. I watch. And I have learned. I learned not to interrupt Father. He liked to speak while we ate dinner. Speak, not talk. Father and I did not talk. He spoke, and I listened. I wanted to believe that my taking Mother's place in the household and at dinner was honoring her memory. And at the first, I did believe it. But soon I began to see that I was not doing anything at all, except providing the vessel into which Father poured his vitriolic opinion of the world. Our nightly dinners were a stage for his soliloquy of anger and disdain. I continued to secretly water Father's wine. Sober, he was abrupt, overbearing, and boorish. Drunk, he was terrifying. He did not beat me. He has never beaten me, though I almost wish he would. At the very least, that would be a sure and outward sign of his abuse. What Father does instead is burn me with his eyes. I have come to loathe his hot, penetrating gaze. Though how can that be? And better asked, why? Why did I come to loathe a simple look? The answer, I hope, I pray, will unravel here in the pages of this journal. Camille visited, though less often. The problem wasn't that our friendship had ended. Not at all. She and I were still as close as sisters when we were together. The problem was that we were less and less able to be together. Mrs. Armoire and Father decided that I must continue Mother's work. So I ladled soup to the miserably starving and handed out clothing to the stinking homeless 3 days per week. That left a mere 2 days out of the 5 when Father worked, for Camille and I to visit. And for me to escape, though it has become more and more clear to me that escape is not possible. I tried to get away from Wheeler House and to call on Camille as I had before Mother's death. I attempted this 4 times. Father thwarted me each time. The first time, leaving late for his banking duties, Father spied me as I was hurrying away, astraddle my neglected bicycle. He didn't come into the street to call me back. No, he sent Carson after me. The poor, aged valet had turned red as a ripe apple as he jogged along South Prairie Avenue to catch up with me.
A bicycle is not ladylike, Father had blustered
when I'd reluctantly followed Carson home. But Mother never minded that I rode my bicycle. She even allowed me to join the Hermes Bicycle Club with Camille and the rest of the girls, I protested.
Your mother is dead, and you are no longer one of the rest of the girls.
Father's eyes had traveled from my gaze down my body, taking in my modest bicycle bloomers and my serviceable, unadorned flat leather shoes.
What you are wearing is lewd.
Father, bicycle bloomers are what all the girls wear. His eyes continued to stare at me, burning me from my waist down. I had to fist my hands at my side to keep from covering myself.
I can see the shape of your body. Your legs.
His voice sounded odd, breathless. My stomach heaved. I will not wear them again, I heard myself saying.
Be sure you do not. It isn't proper. Not proper at all.
Son of a bitch. impersonate.
Your dad?
Yeah.
His hot gaze finally left me. He pushed his hat firmly on his head and bowed sardonically to me.
I shall see you at dinner, where you will behave as and be dressed in the fashion of a civilized lady, worthy of her position as mistress of my home. Do you understand me?
Yes, Father.
Carson?
Yes, sir. His poor valet, who had been hovering nervously in the corner of the foyer, had jumped at Father's violent tone and skittered to him, reminding me of a large old beetle.
See that Miss Wheeler remains at home today, where she belongs, and get rid of that infernal bicycle.
Very good, sir. I will do as you say. The old wretch had simpered and bowed as Father had stalked from the house. Alone with him, Carson's eyes flicked from mine to the tapestry on the wall behind us, then to the chandelier, then to the floor, everywhere except truly meeting my gaze.
Please, miss, you know I can't let you leave.
Yes, I know. I chewed my lip and added hesitantly, Carson, could you, perhaps, move my bicycle from the outbuilding to the gardening shed at the rear of the grounds, instead of actually getting rid of it? Father never goes there. He'll not know. I'm sure he'll be more reasonable soon and allow me to return to my club.
I would like to, miss. I would. But I cannot disobey Mr. Wheeler. Ever.
I turned on my heels and slammed the door to the parlor that had become mine. I hadn't really been angry with Carson, nor did I blame him. I did understand all too well what it was to be Father's puppet. That night, I dressed carefully for dinner in my most modest gown. Father hardly glanced at me, only talked endlessly about the bank, the precarious state of finances in the city, and the impending World's Fair. I rarely spoke. I nodded demurely and made agreeable noises when he paused. He drank goblet after goblet of the secretly watered wine, and ate an entire rack of rare lamb. It wasn't until he stood and bade me good night that his gaze lingered on mine. I could see that, despite the weakened wine, he'd had enough of it to flush his cheeks. Good night, Father, I said quickly. His gaze scalded from my eyes to my lips. I flattened them together, wishing they were less full, less pink. The gaze then went from my lips to the high bodice of my dress. Then, quite abruptly, he met my eyes again.
Tell cook to have the lamb more often, and have her be sure it is as rare next time as it was tonight. I find I have a taste for it,
he said. Yes, Father. I kept my voice soft and low. Good night, I repeated.
You know, you have your mother's eyes.
My stomach heaved. Yes, I know. Good night, Father, I said for the third time. Finally, without another word, he'd left the room. I went to my bedchamber and sat in my window seat, my neatly folded bicycling bloomers in my lap. I watched the moon rise and begin to climb its way down the sky, and when the night was at its darkest, I made my way carefully, quietly down the stairs, and out the rear door that led to the path, which emptied into our elaborate gardens. As I'd walked past the great bull fountain, I pretended that I was just another of the shadows surrounding it, not a living thing, not a girl who could be discovered. I'd found my way to the utility shed and discovered a shovel. Behind the shed at the edge of our property, I went to the pile of rotting compost the laborers used as fertilizer. Not heeding the smell, I dug deeply until I'd been certain they would be safely hidden, and I'd buried my bloomers. Afterward, I returned the shovel and washed my hands in the rainwater barrel. Then I went to my stone bench beneath the willow tree. I sat within its dark, comforting curtain until my stomach stopped heaving, and I was quite sure I would not be sick. Then I sat some more, allowing the shadows and the darkness of the night to soothe me. Though not on bicycle, never again on bicycle, I made my way to Camille's home 3 more times, walking the short distance down South Prairie Avenue to the Elcott mansion. 2 of the 3 times, she and I had managed to stroll toward the lake, wanting to catch a glimpse of the magical world that was being created from marsh and sand, and had the whole city abuzz. Mrs. Elcott's maid had intercepted us both times with the urgent message that I was needed at home. When I returned home, there was always something to be tended to, but that something was never urgent. And each evening Father drank heavily, his hot gaze focusing on me more and more frequently. So, you see, it was madness for me to go to Camille a 3rd time. Isn't it madness to do a thing again and expect a different outcome? Does that not make me mad? But I do not feel mad. I feel very much myself. My mind is clear. My thoughts are my own. I miss Mother, but the numbness of mourning has left me. What has replaced it is a waiting, wondering sense of dread. To combat the dread, I have come to crave the normalcy of my old life so desperately that it is beyond my ability to translate it into words. Perhaps I am having a bout of hysterics. But I don't lose my breath or faint or burst into flamboyant tears. So, is the coolness of my temperament more proof that I am mad? Or could how I feel be much like how any girl would feel whose mother's death had so untimely come? Is Father's hot gaze only a symptom of his widower's grief? I do, indeed, have my mother's eyes. Whatever is true, I could not stay away from Camille and the life I missed so very much. This very afternoon, I visited Camille again. We did not attempt to leave the Elcott home this time. It was an unspoken agreement between us that we knew our visit would end abruptly with Carson coming to escort me home. Camille embraced me, and then called for tea in the old nursery that had been made over into a rose-wallpapered parlor for the Elcott daughters. While we were alone, Camille had grasped my hand. "Emily, I am so very glad to see you. I've been so worried. When I called on you last Wednesday, your father's valet told me you were unavailable. That is exactly what he said the Friday before as well." I was unavailable. I curled my lip and emphasized the word. Both days I was at dreary Market Hall, being a servant to the homeless of Chicago. Camille's smooth brow furrowed. "Then, you haven't been ill?" I snorted. "Not ill of body, but ill of mind and heart. It is as if Father expects me to take Mother's place in all things." Camille fanned herself with her delicate fingers. "I am so relieved. I thought you might have been struck by the pneumonia. You know, Evelyn died of it last week." I felt a shudder of shock. I didn't know. No one told me. How terrible. How very terrible. Don't be frightened. You look strong and as beautiful as ever. I shook my head. Beautiful and strong? I feel as if I am 1,000 years old, and that the whole world has passed me by. I miss you, and I miss my old life so very much. Mother says what you're doing is more important than the girls' games we used to play. And I know she must be right. Being lady of a great house is very important. But I'm not the lady of a great house. I am more servant than anything else. I felt as if I wanted to explode. I'm not allowed to breathe one bit of freedom. Camille tried to put a cheery face on my changes. It is the middle of April. In 2 weeks, it will be 6 months since your mother's death. Then you will be free of mourning and be able to rejoin society. I don't know if I can even bear 2 more weeks of everything being so very dreary and so very boring until then. I chewed my lip at Camille's surprised look and hurried to explain. Being the lady of Wheeler House is a job, a terribly serious job. Everything must be just so, and just so means exactly how Father wants it, which is how Mother had it. I didn't understand how hard and grim it is to be a wife. I drew a deep breath and said, "She tried to tell me. That day, the day she died, that is why I was in the birthing room with her. Mother said she wanted me to know what it was to be a wife, and to not go blindly into it as she had. So I watched. Camille, I watched her die in a flood of blood, with no loving husband holding her hand and mourning at her side. That is what it is to be a wife. Loneliness and death. Camille, we must never get married." Camille had been stirring her tea quite manically, or I'd been unburdening myself of thoughts I'd been longing to share with someone. She dropped her spoon at my exclamation. I'd watched her gaze flick nervously to the closed parlor room door, and then back to me. "Emily, I do not think it is good that you linger on thoughts of your mother's death. It cannot be healthy."